I should have known better. I wanted it so badly that I let it cloud my judgment. A guy like me would never get a girl like Angela, maybe in the movies, but not in real life. 3 years ago, Angela started working in the office of SSA, which stands for Safety and Security Affiliates. All the male employees were aware of her presence, mostly because she was a head taller than the other office girls. She wasn't smarter or more educated, but prettier and sexier. She didn't wear a wedding ring. I was fascinated by it. Didn't take long to realize that she was way out of my league. I wasn't even in the same league as her. The only girls or women I'd ever had a relationship with were the ones that charged by the hour. I wasn't a virgin, but only because I'd worked up the courage to approach one of the less fierce-looking ladies of the night a few times. I actually found some of the younger ones attractive, but all he wanted from me was my money. I couldn't even find one willing to spend one. I was really struggling to find the right words to say. I once had a one-night stand with a woman who was a single mom. My own mother passed away when I was young, and I never got to know my father. I think my lack of social skills was a factor in that. My mom noticed my problem and tried to help me. I took ballroom dancing classes with her for almost 2 years, but I only learned how to dance. I still lacked the confidence and courage to meet and socialize with the opposite sex. After I graduated from high school, my mom got married and moved to Florida. We kept in touch. I saw her a few times a year, but that was it. I liked working at SSA because I didn't have to interact with a lot of people. My days were spent checking fire and burglar alarm systems. The company was also heavily involved in installing security systems, which I wasn't interested in at all. I didn't have a social life after work. I enjoyed solving logic problems in the evenings, and I had a subscription to all the puzzle magazines. I had a home computer, but I only used it when I needed to. I ate microwave meals. I was a picky eater, so I never weighed more than 150 lbs, which was healthy for my height. I didn't even have a suit because I never needed one during the day. I wore my work dickies, which the company supplied. I wore them even on weekends when I wasn't working. There was a landline phone in the house, and I had a company cell phone. The cell phone had limited minutes on it, so I used it when I called my mom. My contacts interfered with my eyes, so I always wore glasses. They weren't the cool kind, though. My glasses were stylish but practical, like a nerd would wear. I think I was a nerd. I've always had limited interactions with people. I didn't upset anyone, but I didn't excite them either. I didn't have any opinions worth sharing, and I was the world's worst joke teller. Now that you know what I have to offer, you can understand why I was surprised and stunned when Angela Trent began chatting with me daily. I wasn't the only one who noticed her interest. After a few weeks, I started getting teased by the other office girls and some of the guys. I was flattered, but also a bit embarrassed. I remember how it all started. "Dennis, could you do me a little favor?" I was sitting at one of the tables in the break room eating lunch. I assumed she wanted to borrow a chair or ask me to move to another table. "Sure, anything. You sit with me while I eat lunch?" I just nodded after a few minutes. I was still trying to figure out what was going on. The other staff members noticed this, and a few quiet remarks were made. As I'm sure you'll understand, I remained silent, as I couldn't say anything that wouldn't make me look like an idiot. So I kept my mouth shut. "I hope you don't mind, but this is much easier for me." "How is it easier?" She seemed to be tidying herself up before answering, as if she were preparing to give a prepared speech. I should have realized what was happening when I came in for break or lunch. There are always other guys sitting with me, which makes me feel uncomfortable. They either make rude remarks, or I didn't know if it was a compliment or an insult. I felt a little guilty, which is understandable. You are an extremely attractive woman, and any man who didn't fantasize about you would be dead. Are you fantasizing about me? I'm a little bit interested in you, but I try not to show it. You're doing a great job of hiding it, so I need to sit with you for as long as I'm with you. The other guys won't bother me if I'm with you. I'm not intimidating. How could my presence discourage anyone? I made sure I didn't make any remarks to her or even peep at her. When I'd finished eating, I sat in silence until she was done. No one bothered us, but we got a few odd looks. When I got up to leave, she touched my arm. "Can you sit with me again tomorrow?" I smiled, nodded, and walked away, feeling a bit embarrassed. After a week, we started socializing. It was hard for me, but it was much easier with her. I learned that she was a single mom with 2 girls who were in high school. Her work shift coincided with her school hours. She never mentioned her husband X. I didn't ask. I was too stupid to ask. My mood lifted and I felt normal. A normal guy spending time with a gorgeous girl in a normal way. I didn't care that it was lunch in the company break room. Our contacts became more and more frequent. I began to feel comfortable with her. At the same time, I felt uneasy. Something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. A few weeks later, she invited me to her house to meet the girls and have dinner. Brandy and Brando were cute little girls, but a little too mannered for my liking. Kids under 10 are usually pretty boisterous, but these two were something else. Angela was a bit like a step forward for me. They were the perfect couple. Angela and I started going on little walks together, and the girls were always with us. We visited all the parks, zoos, and other attractions within a day's drive. The more time I spent with the girls, the more relaxed they became. Before I knew it, I was already looking forward to every opportunity to see them. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but one night, about 4 months later, I found myself in bed with her. When I think back to that night, the same thing comes up. I didn't do anything to initiate it. She took the initiative and seemed to control everything, including the pace and what we did. I'm not complaining. It was the first time I got something for free. It wasn't wild or passionate sex, but it was real. After the first night, we started enjoying ourselves regularly. At least I was enjoying myself. I was never sure about her. Angela had small breasts, and even after having 2 children, they remained quite lush. Of course, you have to remember that I'm not an expert on such things. She didn't shave like the girls in porn movies. Every time I watched her go to the bathroom, I was overcome with excitement. My life had suddenly taken a completely different turn, but something was wrong. To everyone's amazement, Angela and I were married 2 months later. It was a small ceremony. My mom flew in from Florida to meet her sister. I paid for her ticket. Most of the people at the wedding were from work. Angela's mother, who lives in Mount Carmel, couldn't make it. I never met her or any of Angela's other family members. She never talked about them. We found a small house to rent until I saved up 20% for a down payment. I made a down payment and was careful about finances. Angela didn't need to work and became a stay-at-home mom. We had sex regularly, which I always enjoyed. Angela always insisted that we use a condom. I had the perfect wife and 2 perfect daughters. After the first year, I assumed things would calm down, but they didn't. It would calm down, but it never did. Every day was the same, and the longer it went on, the more paranoid I became. In the evenings, I would sit in silence, trying to figure out what was wrong. The problem was that nothing was wrong. Angela was a wonderful wife, a wonderful mother, and a wonderful partner. I began to think I was going crazy. I was lost in my own thoughts and couldn't stop. I kept asking myself, why is this happening to me? Why am I persistently destroying my life? The best part of the wedding was the time I spent with the girls. I think they enjoyed it as much as I did. I'm a logical person. I like to analyze things and draw conclusions. It's my nature. There was no reason why I couldn't. Take a step back and think about what's going on here. I wasn't going to turn into some annoying, nosy person, but I would have to start paying attention to things and figuring things out. I made a mental note of a few questions that needed to be answered. Why had I never met anyone from Angela's family? What was she really doing visiting her mother? In Mount Carmel, several times a month, I had to ask myself why the girl's father was such a mysterious figure. I had one question to answer first. What did she keep in a small locked folder on a shelf in her closed closet? The only time I had seen her with it was when she was enrolling the girls in school. I didn't even know where she kept the key. I decided to start by looking in the locked box. It was a logical problem, a real-life logical problem. I suddenly found myself looking forward to something and not being paranoid. My attitude changed for the better. Angela was always going to the hairdressers at Elegant Chic every Tuesday morning. It was a very expensive salon, but I saw it on the credit cards. I figured she was paying in cash, but she never had much cash on her, and I never saw any evidence of unusual cash withdrawals. Of course, I had no idea how much a hair appointment should cost, so I had no point of reference. It just seemed odd. I pulled into the house mid-morning Tuesday with no problem. I waited until she left to go into the house. Standing in front of the closet, I began to worry that she might have a clue placed on or near the. I thought about it for a few moments, and then decided it was probably a bad idea. She was confident in her position in the house, and that her box would not be disturbed. I was a good guy, and I was someone she could trust. I wouldn't pry under any circumstances. I carefully removed the box and started working on the lock. It was a simple flat key with very simple notches. It took less than 2 minutes to open it. Inside, I found her birth certificate. There was nothing special on it. She had also put I also found a marriage certificate, some newspaper clippings, and a few pictures in the box. One of them was of her high school graduation. She was just as beautiful then as she is now. Her prom date looked familiar, but I couldn't remember who he was. The last thing in the box was 2 birth certificates for the girls. They were both born at Pottsville Hospital, but the most interesting part was the father's name. Anthony Ryder was listed as the father of both Brandy and Brenda. I recognized the guy in Angela's graduation. Anthony Ryder was a member of the state assembly and was selected to run for the next election to the United States House of Representatives. He was handsome and charismatic, and all the women voters loved him, and the men admired him. He had every chance of being elected. He was married to Emily Wilcox, the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the northeastern part of the state. Some people said that Anthony's rise in the political world was due to the support he received from his father. Emily Wilcox was a bit of a paradox. Their marriage was a big deal at the time, with all the newspapers and magazines writing about it. When they got married, she was a pretty modest, unassuming little thing. But over the years, she seemed to change, and not for the better. At one point, she dyed her hair blonde and started wearing it in styles that didn't suit her. Her makeup gradually became a bit too revealing, with too much blush, too much plucking, and too much lipstick. Her outfits and breasts changed. She seemed to have gone from regular to a pair of grotesque double Ds. It was a shame her character didn't match her looks. I often wondered if she knew people were laughing behind her back. Of course, it was none of my business, so I didn't give it too much thought until today. Angela shouldn't notice that the box has been moved or opened. I was very careful. I really didn't believe she was referring to it. She was looking at the box too much. From what I know now, I didn't understand why she would want it. In fact, it would have made more sense for her to keep the box at her mother's house. Now I knew a little more than I had before. Angela had been friends with Anthony Ryder since high school and was the mother of 2 of his children. Actually, there were only 2 because with Emily he didn't have any. It was interesting that Angela had put his name on the birth certificates. Given the circumstances, it seemed like something he wouldn't want to do that evening. I was being a good husband as usual, complimenting my wife on her hair and asking the girls how school was going. I felt a bit fake about it. It was a game. Angela knew what the game was and had been playing it for over a year. I was still a beginner. I had to develop my own strategy. The word strategy alone implied that it would be long. I wasn't happy with that term, but I didn't have a short while my wife and kids were watching TV. I ordered a GPS tracker on eBay for just $139 with free shipping. I thought it would be interesting to see where Angela was headed when she went to visit her mother. The new tracker would nicely complement my Garmin GPS Map 60 CSX. As a protective measure, I opened several new bank accounts to safeguard my few assets. The next day, I took 2 weeks of sick leave, which the company was happy for me to do for monetary reasons. Angela never made any friends at SSA, so I didn't have to worry about her finding out I wasn't at work later that morning. I dropped by Seymour Slumps's house. Seymour and I went to high school together. We were 2 outcast kids who had built a friendship on not being part of the crowd. Seymour had a law degree but no job. He was on the state, county, and city lists, waiting for someone to die so that a vacancy could occur. In the meantime, he supported himself and his mother by doing mostly car title rows and transfers. He also did now work in wills. I needed legal advice, and Seymour was happy to help. We spent an hour together, and when I left, he was as excited as a child getting a new puppy. I drove towards Allentown and had lunch at McDonald's. There was free Wi-Fi. Fee and I had my laptop within an hour. I had all sorts of data and information on Anthony Ryder. Most of it was political rhetoric, but among it was information I could use. I also had a long list of addresses that I would need later. While surfing, I came across an advertisement for a traveling expo that was taking place in Philadelphia over the weekend. Angela and the kids were going to visit her mom on Friday after school, and I thought the expo looked good. After dinner that night, I did something I had never done before while Angela took her. That evening, I took the liberty of looking in her purse. I had never considered violating her personal space like this before, but now we were playing a game. Everything looked normal. I was about to close up when I suddenly noticed something. Angela used tampons when she had her period, but at the very bottom of her purse was a small bag labeled sex. Like any normal man, I avoided picking it up. I picked it up and carefully opened it to reveal an old Nokia cell phone. It only took me a minute to realize that it was a prepaid phone with I checked the call log, and there was only one number in it. I found the phone and it was turned off, so I left it as I found it. I figured out who the number belonged to pretty easily. I think I already know Seymour was in a good mood. There were several folders in a neat row on his desk, and he seemed eager for me to sit down and show me what he'd done. "Dennis, you said you wanted a simple divorce, but given the circumstances, you've got a pretty good case for an alimony. The nice thing about it is that Angela won't be able to contest it, and there will be no division of property. Each of you will get what you brought to the marriage. Are you sure it would make things a lot easier and a lot faster?" Seymour pushed the first folder aside. "What else?" "I had no trouble getting copies of the girls' birth certificates. Legally, Anthony Ryder owes you no favors for taking care of the girls. If he'd gone to court, we'd have been defeated in the first 5 minutes. The court of public opinion will deal with it, though. I suggest you file a complaint against him and make sure the media are fully aware of it. That'll be your responsibility. Why am I paying you for legal services, Dennis? If I'm caught participating in a smear campaign, especially against a public official, my potential career as a lawyer will be over before it begins. Okay, what do I do? We need to do everything that's printed on this top sheet. Memorize the instructions carefully and then burn the paper. Is this a joke?" I heard a groan from the other end of the table. "I'm sorry, but I was just trying to make things a little easier." The next file was Anthony's charge of alienation of affection. Seymour didn't feel this case would fly either, but it could be just as valuable as the previous one. The next claim was for the recovery of Angela's. The last folder wasn't directly related to me, but it was a motion to file charges against Anthony Ryder for 6 different civil violations that were very remotely related to the situation. Seymour actually charged Anthony Ryder with prostitution. He claimed that Anthony had forced Angela to trade sex for room and board for himself and the girls. Another long trial that he had no chance of winning, but it would get a lot of attention. There were still a few things to sort out, including at least one example of evidence of a secret relationship between them. I hoped to be done with that this weekend. Angela was surprised to see me when I came home for lunch. I wanted to be there when the mail was delivered. She seemed glad for the company and made us grilled cheese sandwiches. I tried It was best to make polite conversation until the mail arrived. She noticed the priority package and commented on it. I told her it was a removable hard drive I had ordered for backing up data on computers. She agreed with the answer, and I left smiling for the next hour. I spent carefully reading all the instructions on how to install and operate my new GPS tracker. This was going to be fun. I had planned it that way that evening. Angela seemed a little quieter than usual. As usual, she was usually cheerful when she came back from her visits to her mum. Friday seemed very far away. I realized I couldn't keep up the pretense for that long. I decided that Tuesday morning, while the girls were at school and Angela was at the beauty parlor, would be the best time to make my move. Monday was a pretty busy day. I took all the prepared envelopes from Seymour's office to the post office. The earliest delivery would be Wednesday. I gave Seymour $5. I took $0 to cover his fee and expenses after reporting to work. I spent the rest of the morning closing out the accounts. One of the local tuxedo rentals was selling used outfits. Fortunately, I was able to find 2 that fit, since I needed a place to store my new clothes. I rented a cheap motel room for 4 nights. I drove past the house as Angela was leaving. I had no idea where she was going, but I figured I'd take the opportunity as I loaded all my stuff into the car. I realized that I didn't really have that much stuff. I felt a little sad as I drove down the I'll miss family life, even though it was a bit of a farce. The girls and I never really fell in love, but I knew I'd be thinking of them. It was a sad situation. I felt hurt and betrayed, but not enough to explode. The only way out for me was to quietly disappear. I rented a storage unit and PID for it a year in advance, even though it was the smallest room. That night, I went overboard at Taco Bell. I took every dish on the menu that I'd never tried before. I can't explain why I did it, except that I felt a little reckless, of course, and most of the pre-go went in the trash. I couldn't bring myself to eat at all. Later, sitting alone in my room, I was beyond bored. Just out of a whim, I called British Air. A very kind young lady happily agreed to move my Friday reservation to Tuesday. Friday was the busiest day for airlines, and Tuesday was a bit slow. The next morning, Seymour drove me to the airport. He was going to keep the car while I was away. I signed over the title and told him he could sell it if he found a buyer. It was almost 15 years old, so we both laughed. When I suggested it, the check-in went very smoothly. Then I found myself sitting on a long plastic bench watching the departure time change. I was totally surprised when my cell phone started buzzing. I had forgotten to turn it off. "Dennis, is that you? It's Brenda. I wasn't expecting any calls, much less one like this. You that we tried really hard not to be bad. Mom said it was very important. We weren't bad, were we?" "Dennis, no. Brenda, you and your sister have always been perfect. You've never done anything wrong. Then why did you leave? I'm sure your mother would rather explain it to you. Have you asked her? She's been lying in bed crying since yesterday. We had to make breakfast ourselves. I felt I should talk to Angela, but under the circumstances it didn't seem like a good idea. Hi, I need to get away from the office for a while." I could hear her crying on the other end of the phone. I was looking for a way to end the conversation without acting like a jerk when they announced my flight was boarding. "I have to go now. Take care of your sister and Mum, okay?" I turned the phone off before she could say anything else. I wouldn't need it for the next 6 months anyway. I found life on a cruise ship fascinating. I worked with one of the ship's engineers in the mornings and spent every evening dancing with enthusiastic ladies. Some of them were. They were mostly young, but some were older than my mother or me. I'd learned to dance with my mother, so it was pretty easy for me. I had a lot of fun. Most of them didn't speak English, so I didn't have much trouble communicating. I made do with a smile and the occasional peck on the cheek. On my 5th voyage, everything changed. On the first day, I was told I'd be dining at the captain's table that evening. Only higher-ranking members of the crew could sit with the captain. I was at the bottom of the food chain. My invitation was a bit unusual. I only had 2 tuxedos for dress clothes, and I usually ate in the teen dining room. I didn't know about protocol or good table manners. I waited until everyone was seated and then approached. There was an empty chair waiting for me. I dressed the captain as I was supposed to and then sat down. I felt very uncomfortable. I looked around the table trying to figure out why I was there. To my left sat a large, sweaty man who seemed to be speaking Greek. To my right sat I caught sight of a woman my age who seemed vaguely familiar when I glanced in her direction. She smiled slightly and looked at me, but I quickly averted my gaze as the food was served. I tried to pay attention to what the guests were chatting about, but it was difficult. I'm not a great conversationalist, and having to speak in multiple languages didn't help. I kept telling myself that the hellish dinner would be over soon. When the dessert dish was brought to me, I felt a hand on my right arm. I turned my head and she spoke. "Relax, Dennis. You look awfully tense." No one had ever introduced me, but she knew my name. I realized that must be the connection, the reason I was at the captain's table. Who was she? How did she know my name? What did she want? It wasn't mysterious and exciting. It was frightening and unnerving. The infernal meal would soon be over. When we finished, the guests began to go about their business. I was still sitting when the mystery woman took my hand and led me to one of the quieter areas of the bar. I followed. I followed her like a puppy following a dog, and I didn't know why. "You have no idea who I am." I just nodded. She laughed lightly. She had bleached blonde hair, lots of makeup, and big boobs. "Oh my God, you're Dolly." Pardon my failed attempt at a joke. I got a poke in the ribs and another small laugh, more like a giggle. "You're not paying attention, Dennis." I think I had an idea of what the answer would be, but knowing that answer made me think of even more questions. Emily Ryder smiled at my answer. "I prefer to use my maiden name." "Okay, Emily Wilcox." Neither of us said anything. "Is the waitress setting out our drinks?" "Mrs. Wilcox, I realize we're related somehow, but I don't see how that could have caused you to." "Dennis, I'm just here to thank you. You probably don't realize the impact you've had on my life. I've never met you before or even seen you up close. Of course, you look quite different from before. It was mostly just hair and makeup. Thank you." At this point, she noticed I was looking at her breasts, or what used to be her breasts. She couldn't help but laugh at my discomfort. "The doctor put them in, the doctor took them out. I've never been so happy to be rid of those damn melons. They made me feel ugly. I didn't know what to say. Any comment would have sounded rude." She continued her explanation. "I just replaced the double D's with small BS. It took a little work, but the pay was good, and I'm happy." I think I blushed. There was a lull in the conversation, and we both took sips from our drinks. "Oh, before I forget, I have something for you." Emily reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope folded in half to fit. She smiled as she held it out. "It's a nice little nod to your marriage. Daddy got it finalized without a problem. You're not married, and you've never been married. That's pretty great, isn't it?" Her words were bittersweet. She seemed more pleased about the nod than I was. It wasn't what I wanted, but what I thought I needed. I'd gotten used to the idea of being I wanted to be married, but under different circumstances. I smiled at Emily every week and said thank you. "I'm not very happy about this, Dennis. This whole situation has been a little painful for me." I asked the waitress to bring 2 more drinks. I usually limit myself to 1 a night. "I don't want to pry, but what is the status of your marriage? Are you divorced, or are you going to be divorced?" Emily Wilcox wrinkled her nose slightly, looked at her watch, and smiled again. "Dennis, in exactly 22 minutes I will be a widow." That was an interesting statement. I tried to think of a clever response, but nothing came to mind. The impact of her statement finally reached my brain, and I went numb. The waitress put our drinks down, and I downed mine in 1 gulp. "Don't look so shocked. It was a compromise." "What does that mean?" "In another 7 days you were supposed to die in an automobile accident south of Pottsville. 2 days later I was supposed to drown in a boat off Long Island. It was all planned. The conversation was no longer light and casual. My drinking companion was no longer smiling, and the whole tone had turned serious. I absorbed the few bits of information she'd just given me and started to feel a bit sick. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Wilcox. I'm afraid the last drink was a bit strong for me. Please excuse me." I stood up and started to leave the room. She didn't try to stop me. I did feel a bit sick. I had a bit of a stomach upset, but I don't think it was because of the drink. I didn't sleep well that night. Instead of eating with the team, I waited until the first breakfast and found Emily. She was sitting at a table alone, which is a luxury only available to the most affluent guests. The waiter recognized me in my work clothes, and we were met with a perplexed look. Emily nodded to indicate that everything was fine. She indicated that everything was fine by holding out her full glass of orange juice to me across the table as a greeting. "Are you a widow now?" she asked. "Ryder leaves a widow, Emily, but no children. Mrs. Ryder was not near her husband at the time of the accident. Anthony Ryder was a candidate for a seat in the U.S. Senate until some allegations of inappropriate behavior surfaced a few weeks ago." I read the rest of the message and was amazed at the effect. My silly little mailing scheme had the waiter put a small plate of fruit in front of me, which I started to eat. "What's going to happen to Angela and the girls?" "Nothing, Dennis. She wasn't involved anymore. I guess you couldn't have known." "What do you mean?" "Shortly before you left, you followed them to a cabin in the Pocono Mountains. Do you remember that?" "Of course. How do you know that my father installed bugs in the cabin and Anthony was constantly being watched? They used the same thing every time they met." "You didn't stay long that day. Not long after you left, Anthony and Angela had a big fight about something he was. Angela decided she didn't want anything to happen to you. Anthony was adamant that they stick to the original plan, which was to kill us both. She refused and left the cabin. She spent the rest of the weekend with her sister in Frackville." "Is that where the girls were? Where is her mother?" "Angela's my mother is in a nursing home in Pottsville, and Anthony is paying her expenses." I finished the fruit and poured myself a cup of coffee from the machine on the table. "Why would he want to kill us? What did it get him?" "We were never sure, but it seems he was hoping to get sympathy votes because he was a grief-stricken widower. On top of that, he would have inherited a lot of money. I think he was hoping to further elevate his position by marrying a widow with 2 little girls. Everything was planned to make him look good in front of the public. It's a pretty stupid plan. What does he gain by killing me? Of course, I'm a little biased." They both laughed at my feeble attempt at black humor. "Why did Angela decide to abandon this plan?" "Dennis, you'll have to ask her, but I think she's starting to have feelings for you. She used me from day one. I was just a tool for her. There's no way she had any feelings for me. Don't count on it." "How do you know all this?" "My father has been following all of this for over a year now." "Why are you here?" "My father is a very slow and meticulous man. We knew what was going on for a long time and realized we needed to get it over with. But according to him, the time was never right. I was tearing my hair out trying to figure out how to get him to do something. And then a knight in shining armor came to my rescue. Thanks. but I don't think that's how I describe myself. You still haven't answered my question. When you flooded the world with lawsuits and publicity, things fell into place very quickly. You pulled my father out of it. I didn't mean to make him look bad. I guess I wanted to get rid of a failed relationship and make my feelings known along the way. You've done well, Dennis. Very good. That's why I'm here to thank you. I smiled and got up from my chair. I'm glad that's all sorted out now. If you'll excuse me, I have to get to work. I'm already late. Relax, Dennis. Your work schedule for the week has been changed. Dad talked to the captain, and for the next 7 days you'll be working just to keep me company. I feel like spending the rest of the week hanging out with a rich, spoiled brat. I had a job to do, Chief Dagger. My immediate supervisor wasn't much help. He sighed when he saw me and told me to go to the helm. I didn't see the captain, but the second mate told me that everything Emily Wilcox had said was true. As I walked, I went back to my cabin and realized I didn't have any clothes that matched what I was about to do. I had 2 used tuxedos, Dickie's work clothes, and the outfit I'd worn when I first got on the ship. I changed into the best shirt and trousers I had and started looking for my new mistress. I found myself being used by a woman again. I didn't like it. Was this really my destiny? Would I really spend the rest of my life as a whipping boy for dominant women? Maybe dominant is too strong a word. Either way, I wasn't happy. She was reading a pocketbook, sitting on the deck and sheltered from the wind. She smiled when I approached, but she looked worried. Dennis, I'm sorry if I upset you. It wasn't my intention. I had hoped you would take some satisfaction from the arrangements with the captain. Your reaction indicates that I was out of line. I sat down next to her and tried to get comfortable. I never liked the lounges on these ships. I was hoping we could come to some sort of arrangement. I'm happy to spend my days with you, and I'll do my best to be a good companion. But I feel my evenings are better spent with the unaccompanied ladies on the cruise. Do you want to dance with them? There are a few other men here who do the same thing, but there are never enough for everyone. These women wait all. I can't let them down. I agree to that, but with some restrictions between dances. You will sit with me and I will choose the women you dance with. Why would you want to do that? I don't know, but let's try it tonight. If it doesn't work out, I'll give up on this venture. Okay, I'll try. Let's give it a try. I'm not sure why you want to do this, but I'm happy to try. Great, we'll stop in Napoy this afternoon, and I'll buy clothes for the rest of the trip. I can afford it, and I won't take no for an answer. Do you have any questions? We both laughed when we realized that I had given her an answer that she said she didn't. The rest of the day passed without any major issues, but there weren't enough days left on the cruise for me to wear all the clothes she'd bought me. Plus, there was no room in my stateroom to store them. Most of the shopping ended up in a room. Emily and I had dinner together, but not at the captain's table. After dinner, I changed into my black tuxedo for the evening. Emily had reserved a small table for 2 at the edge of the dance floor and was waiting for me. You look very elegant, Dennis. The tuxedo Sue. You look great. I just feel out of place. You're looking at me. Do I look okay? You look beautiful. I can't understand why. Anthony didn't appreciate what he had. I spent an hour in the ship's beauty parlor getting ready for tonight. I'm glad you think it was worth the time spent. The dress fits perfectly and emphasizes the pearls. I don't mean to be rude, but I think adjusting the bust line was a good decision. She leaned toward me and, Dennis, you shouldn't be making remarks about women's breasts. It's inappropriate. I'm sorry, I don't have much experience in this field, but I'm a quick learner. Some of these ladies are real coats. Before making myself comfortable, I excused myself and walked over to the line of companions. There were dancers standing near the stage, and most of them were older men who had been given free cruises in exchange for dancing with the guests for 6 hours a day. They all loved these evenings and enjoyed entertaining the ladies they knew of my situation. But I still teased them. Each of them promised to dance at least one dance with Emily that evening. Emily enjoyed the evening more than I could have expected. Every dance she picked a different partner for me. The biggest problem was a German lady in a wheelchair. I didn't know how to handle her until the lady herself made a few suggestions. She was the only one I danced with. I danced with Emily twice, and she danced several times with different passengers each time. It was easy to see why she stayed with me until the group had finished for the evening. I walked her to the recreation room, and she gave me a kiss on the cheek and a sincere thank you. It was a wonderful evening. The week flew by. On the last night of the trip, Emily literally pulled me into her room and flirted with me. I got the feeling that she was a little disappointed that I hadn't made an effort the previous nights. Her new breasts were still a little tender, but not enough to prevent her from enjoying my clumsy attempts to gently nuzzle. I'd never had sex seem so fun and relaxed before. Emily and I seemed to move together and fit together perfectly. When I clumsily tried to open the condom packet, she grabbed it and threw it on the floor. I was in seventh heaven for hours later. She was about to fly home and tried to convince me to go with her. I didn't feel comfortable, though. I still had 4 months left on my contract. I promised to contact her as soon as I fulfilled my obligations. It was a small, stupid decision, but it was still important to me for the next few weeks. I tried to convince myself that it was only because she was recovering from her spat. With Anthony, I sometimes felt like a bore for taking advantage of a grieving widow. But then I remembered that she wasn't grieving, but rather celebrating. The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. Mornings were filled with daily safety reports and maintenance logs. Evenings were filled with dancing. I started to focus on entertaining ladies with disabilities. The other escort dancers were happy for me to do this, and the guests were pleased. Emily Wilcox hadn't sent any messages, and Angela hadn't contacted me either. But she didn't know where I was. I found myself thinking about Brandy and Brenda a lot more often than I expected. I really missed them. I spent a lot of time thinking about the situation Angela had put us in. I understood the basic concept of what she and Anthony were trying to do, but I never understood why they decided to do it. It was easy for my simple mind to. I told myself I wasn't sophisticated enough to understand it. Only Angela could answer all my questions. My contract was ending, and the cruise line wanted me to sign on for another 6 months with a small bonus. They also offered to send me to a maritime school in London, so I could get some certifications related to the ship's electronic and safety systems. If I agreed to the training, I'd have to work for the company for a year. I promised to give them an answer within 30 days. I was flattered to learn that several lady guests had asked for dates when I would be on board so they could schedule. Instead of flying home, I flew to Orlando. My mom was staying with a guy she met in Ocala. He was pretty cool. When the plane landed in Philadelphia, I was in a pretty down mood. I wasn't looking forward to coming home. I was looking forward to it, but it had to be done. It was time to have a chat with Seymour. I wanted to make sure I didn't know him. I had nowhere to stay, no job prospects, and nothing to look forward to. It would have been so much easier if I had done a little bit of planning ahead of time. There had been plenty of time for that. I should have looked online for a new job or at least a new place to live, but I just didn't have the motivation. Most of the people getting off the plane in the terminal seemed alert and excited, but I was in a second group of businessmen who were returning home with droopy eyes and a bored expression. A whole chapter of my life had passed and I had nothing to show for it. I was left feeling depressed and heartbroken as I watched other passengers being greeted by their loved ones. All I could do was rent a car and head back to the source of my misery. I was startled by the sound of my name being shouted by some kids, but it only lasted a moment. I remembered that there were over 200 people on the flight, so the odds of someone in my family having the same name as me were pretty high. I smiled at my gullibility and kept walking. Dennis, it was happening again. I looked for the source and was surprised to see Brenda and Brandy running up to me. It didn't make sense. No one knew I was even on the plane. After a few seconds, they both started grabbing my arms. They'd never acted like this before, so I was confused. Angela could explain it. I was sure the only problem was that Angela wasn't there. Emily was waiting with a smile on her face. I set my bag down. We exchanged kisses on the cheeks, like you see in movies but never in real life. It seemed natural, and I didn't know what else was expected of me. We were walking towards the terminal exit when a guy came up to us and asked for my plane tickets. Emily nodded at me, so I handed them to him. The limo was waiting at the curb, and the two girls chatted the whole time. In fact, they talked more today than I'd ever heard them say before. I caught words like limousine and announcement, Emily, but I couldn't form any complete sentences when the limousine doors closed. It was very quiet. The hustle and bustle of the terminal were behind us. Welcome. Home. Dennis. Emily took my hand and smiled. I didn't have time to respond. Isn't this great, Dennis? Have you ever ridden in a limo? I couldn't make out which girl was speaking. I looked around and smiled. I really missed them. No, never. We're having a sister. I want to name her Brittany, but Brenda wants to name her Bethany. What do you think? Dennis, what do you want to name her? My head was spinning with a million questions. waiting to be answered, but I couldn't formulate any. The comment about the new sister began to get to me. Was Angela pregnant, and if so, where was she? I paused and looked at Emily. She smiled and lowered her gaze to her belly, although it was too early for anything to be felt. She placed my hand on her stomach when Emily said no condom was needed. I assumed she was on some kind of birth control, but it seemed I was wrong. "Dennis, are you happy to see us?" Brenda tried to nudge me slightly to get my attention, but the limo seat was too far away. "Yes, I missed you both. I'm really happy to see you too." I got two big smiles and a squeeze of Emily's hand in return. "I'm going to have to ask you for an explanation, Emily. You might not want to tell me, but I'm going to have to know." Angela spoke to someone in the state's attorney's office after I left. She agreed to testify against Anthony. The case was never actually tried. Anthony Ryder's death put an end to it. A state employee was determined to punish Angela, and she ended up getting 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit murder and several other equally ridiculous charges. Angela's sister couldn't look after Brandy and Brenda, so Emily volunteered to help out. As it turns out, Emily and Angela became friends. I'm currently living with Emily and the girls. As soon as Angela gets out of jail, we're all going on a week-long cruise. We're going on a long cruise in the Mediterranean. I don't know how we'll sleep, but I'm sure Emily will surprise me. I have 2 new tuxedos. Oh, and I turned down the job.